Yes, Your Grace is the kind of game that has some of the highest highs and lowest lows in the world of indie gaming, but that has severe issues striking a balance between the two of them. This is absolutely not to say that this is a terrible game, but unlike the reviews currently out there for it, there won't be any beating around the bush. Sometimes this game makes you want to punch your monitor clean through. Let's get through what the game is so we can get to the meat and potatoes quickly. In Yes, Your Grace, you are playing as Eric, the King of Davern, and you need to manage your kingdom through the resources that are available to you. This first comes in the form of gold, which you will spend to upgrade your castle, buy items, and most importantly help the citizens of your kingdom. The second comes in the form of supplies, which does the same, and the third which comes in the form of contentment, the happiness of your population. You can also send invitations through the form of a pigeon and use your agents, a general, a witch, and a hunter to do various tasks. The primary gameplay loop consists of surviving while helping the people around you in order to make it to the next week. If you fall to 0 in any resource, it's game over, start again. Or not, we'll come back to this later. Anyway, the secondary gameplay loop consists of advancing the story through the use of your time and resources. This involves talking to the characters that populate the world, trying to figure out what the hell happened when the king that was supposed to give you an army died at the wedding of your daughter, and having multiple moral dilemmas to resolve. This in turn makes the plot advance and allows you to progress through the game. The third and much smaller gameplay loop has to do with your agents. If you do not use them for the two previous loops, you can eventually start using them to resolve other matters around your kingdom, which will pay off later down the line. Okay, so that's essentially the entirety of the game. It's pretty simple in nature. It's tagged as an RPG medieval war simulation game on Steam, but it is much closer to a resource management game hidden behind its narrative front of a medieval war. Despite this, there are some genuinely great things about this game that need to be addressed. The first one is the graphical style the developers have decided to go with. This is something I've come around to really liking because at first I thought it was a little jarring. The promotional material for the game hits you with these gorgeous depictions of the characters, and in-game you are hit with this. Pixel graphics. And they are nothing crazy, it's not the most intricate of designs or even the most original, but it does serve a function which I think is really neat. The best comparison I have for the graphical style of Yes, Your Grace is old school Pokemon games, Nintendo DS at the oldest. Pokemon was really good at doing one thing in terms of graphics outside of its battle sprites, depicting a world with just enough resolution that you had an idea as to what you were looking at, but not enough to completely stop you from interpreting it yourself. Yes, Your Grace has a very similar approach. Its characters have enough definition that you can distinctly tell them apart from one another, but not enough that you cannot imagine their expressions for yourself. This means your mind is doing a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to the story. The only things you have at your disposal is the text and voice tones the characters have. And this is a good thing. It allows for the player to create their own narrative and add their own flavor to it when they go through the game. The second genuinely great thing about this game is its ability to constantly check you for ankle breaks, and I mean this in the most literal way possible. This game never really lets up on you. It's always trying to either 1. Pry your logical mind to test you on what you need to do and punish you heavily if you don't do it right, or 2. Pry your ethical mind to test you on what you ought to do and punish you heavily if you don't do it right. This game doesn't let you breathe. You need to be actively thinking about what you are doing, even for what appears to be seemingly dumb or obvious things, because it will make you pay for it and make you look like a total dumbass on top if you don't. It's brutal. On my first playthrough, I held this massive wedding to commemorate my daughter's marriage, only to be financially crippled for the rest of the game because I had no idea what it had in store for me. Newsflash, it was a huge waste of money because the king with which I made an alliance fucking died. It goes all the way to the very ending of the game, which is absolutely amazing and might be one of my favorite endings to an indie story in a long time. But that's not how it executes it the best. That would have to go to the story. If you don't act like a good person and you don't have your shit together, bad stuff will happen to you and your loved ones. Disallow your daughter to have fun with her pets, she dies. Mess up with helping your wife have her child, she dies. Try to spare some nobles to make a good impression, your right-hand man dies. This is what the final season of Game of Thrones should have been like. With every decision you make, there there is a considerable chance something terrible will happen to the people close to you. And it is truly gut-wrenching because you do build some attachment to the characters. They are pretty lovable, and there are some great scenes to make you feel bad when some inevitable doom crashes upon them. The third thing I can proudly say to be genuinely great about this game is its accessibility of depth. At surface level, this is a game about a king of a domain that is a little crummy, needing some help from buddies to stay afloat, and manages some way, somehow, to not mess it all up. The big thing, however, is that if you are willing to dig just a little deeper, this becomes a much better story. It's about a man testing the trials of fate and attempting to escape them by sheer work, will, and dedication. The leader of the first enemies you encounter was promised years ago the hand of your eldest daughter, and you attempt to quote-unquote save her by marrying her to someone else while also getting an army to destroy the first enemies. Except the guy that you made a deal with dies, leaving you with no army in a much worse position because you now have to prove that you didn't do it. You are now fated to also die, either by the hands of the first enemies or by retribution for being unable to prove it wasn't you who did it. If you end up being able to escape that fate, the second wave of enemies comes around to make you pay for your sins. Your wife is also cursed, fated to never be able to give you an heir to secure the lineage of the kingdom, and also probably die during labor. These are all events that supposedly have to happen no matter what, and which you can turn into a different situation by defying fate itself. That is fucking cool, man. That is a great theme for a story, and it works beautifully for this game. Sadly, this is where the good part ends and where I tear Yes Your Grace a new one. Holy shit, is this game a mess sometimes. I have a lot to say about it, so let's try to make it quick. Failing in this game means nothing. It's not even a little bad. This is because of the save system the game uses. Every week you are able to save your game and progress onto the next one. This isn't so much of an issue if it stands alone, but when taking into account what it leads to, it really is a problem to some extent. The game allows you to load a save up to 8 weeks in the past. This means that if ever you fail for whatever reason, you can simply load a save up to a point where this doesn't matter anymore, since you've learned from your mistake and you won't do it again. In doing so, it takes any weight the potential negative outcomes might have and nullifies them entirely. If your daughter dies, you can go back to when she plays with the bear. If your wife dies, load the day where you need to do the ritual and grind it until you pass it. If you end up killing your right-hand man and you decide that that is a pretty bad thing, load the day of the trial and choose someone else. There is nothing stopping you from doing so. No downsides whatsoever. And I would even argue that it is encouraged to some extent because you can go so far back in time. The alternative would be to make it so that if you have an issue and shit hits the fan, you'd have to restart the game, but this is something that's completely off the table because the introduction to the game is really long. I tried to speedrun it to gain a single achievement, and it took me a solid 20 minutes to get there, skipping all the dialogue possible, taking the simplest approach to any problems my petitioners had, and skipping every day as soon as possible. Not doing so results in an introduction that is over an hour long, which is when King Talus gets poisoned and dies. Before that, the game is more or less started, since you do not have all of your options available to you and have no real agency as to what you are doing. Only after King Talus dies are you truly allowed to do whatever you want as a king, so restarting the game every time you mess up is not an option unless there is some option or mechanic available to skip the introduction completely. But wait, that would only fix one of the gameplay issues. This game is essentially a glorified visual novel, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but a lot of choices you make through the game just do not matter at all, which is a problem with a visual novel, because at that point you might as well just write a book. The point to making a game is to make it interactive. There is an entire plotline with Pietro, a schizophrenic guy who turns out to be a lord. If you don't help him, he ends up drowned in a river, but if you help him, you get Well, not much, 6 soldiers and some gold. The choice you have to make between the two options is so inconsequential that it really doesn't matter what you do with him. You might think this is a bit of a nitpick, but it truly isn't, so let's explore another example. The choice you have to make between helping the Radovians, the first enemies you face off against, or systematically screwing them over. Whether you help them or not, you are given the exact same treatment, 8,000 soldiers that will help you out eventually. If you try to reach a sort of common ground and end up blundering your previous alliances, you can always pawn off one of your daughters to Verid the Old Coot and get the army also. Whether you pick any of these options, it does not matter. You will reach the same point in the story. It all converges onto one plot point. If that sounded pretty contrived to you, worry not. There is plenty more where that came from. There are some major inconsistencies in the story, and I am usually not one to care much for those if the point that is being made is valid and relevant, but even I have to draw the line somewhere. I cannot believe that letting your preteen daughter wander off into the world with what could essentially very well be a baseless crush with the daughter of some of the people that attempted to destroy your kingdom only a few weeks earlier is the best outcome. And that's not me talking, this is what the game considers to be the best and canon outcome, something we know because of the comic the developers have released, that depicts Azalea with Maya stealing a bison. I can already hear the comments whining.
But Vernier, they're cute together, they can defend themselves, why are you so stuck up on this?
Because Eric, the character you are playing, is under so much stress that he faints constantly. He just lost a daughter knowing that she had been burned at the stake. His wife is cursed, his kingdom is under attack, my man is not doing well, he's mentally overloaded, on the verge of being burnt out, and Azalea makes a request that is completely out there and agreeing with it is seen as wholesome and beautiful. What the fuck is wrong with this game? Eric is not in a position to make a life-altering decision for his daughter like that, especially if she's about to be in a grave amount of danger. Turn the situation on its head for a second. Does exploiting the weakness of your mentally unstable and potentially ill father to gain his blessing sound like a good thing? No, it doesn't, and that's only one plot point. I don't even want to get into the classification of magic the world is built upon. Is it a soft magic system? Is it a hard magic system? Nobody fucking knows, and I don't even think the writers themselves know. This is not something you can even fix by playing the game multiple times, because the story is so linear you have no choice and no say on the matter. You're just being railroaded into what the developers think is good without being able to influence it at all. We're still not done on the story, by the way. There's another big thing that arises from the 3 previous points. The game almost has no replayability. If you play through it once, you essentially know what to do from the get-go for your following playthroughs. The events don't change in order, they don't change in flavor, they are presented the exact same way at the exact same time. It's to the point where you can accurately predict on which weeks you need to do certain things in order to maximize your potential outcome. It's a pretty big problem because while you might be challenged for your first playthrough, if and only if you do not use the save system to nullify any negative outcome, you can't even be bothered to be challenged another time. My second playthrough took half of the time of the first one, and I managed to get so ahead in my resources that I wasn't even threatened by buying the most outrageous upgrades and helping the most greedy of my citizens. Which leads me to my last point. This game is not worth $22. I'm not even sure if it's worth half of that. I had the chance to snag it for $4 or $5 and I still feel like I would have rather used my money on something else. If even after everything that we have covered, this feels like a game you want to try, then please go ahead. As for a score, we have previously covered the rating system used on this channel in the Arcane Season 1 video, link down in the description, and I cannot score this game any higher than a 4 out of 10. A 5 out of 10 is completely average, but this game presents too many issues to justify this score, so down it goes to 4. If you find yourself not agreeing with this conclusion, feel free to go off in the comments down below right after you've subscribed. Thank you for watching.